Hey everybody, how's it going? I want to start the Q&A by saying a huge thank you to everyone that's taken the time to comment, to like, subscribe, to share. It's really appreciated, and it's a great motivator for me to keep on doing this. So with this Q&A, I'm going to simply go down through all your questions, answer the most frequently asked ones, try and bundle a couple in together if they're of the same topic, and answer as many as possible. So here we go. First off, Will Rollason, can I go for a bike ride with you after COVID? Depending on where you live, probably. Sham, first, what is your opinion on weight training for a cyclist? Should the focus be on lightweight conditioning or strength and development? My opinion on the calisthenics? Yes, I think weight training for cyclists is actually quite important. It's the sort of thing that's been scientifically proven to help with muscle recruitment, but also it's going to help protect your body against injury if you're prone to injury. It's not going to be for everyone, and the sort of training that everyone needs to do is going to be quite different depending on their requirements. Thoughts on calisthenics? Well, actually, that's a perfect way to get into it. If you're not sure what that is, that's gravity and body weight assisted weight training. And if you haven't got tools as in gym equipment at home, that's probably the best place to start. And in fact, most fitness and strength and conditioning programs will have you starting with body weight anyway. How can a power meter help me with training? This is from Lala. I'm aware of using it as a pacing tool, but I'm curious about how it helps you improve and how quickly can you see improvements using it? Right, Ivan, a power meter can help you because it will help you train really specifically, but it's only going to help you if you've got someone giving you the sort of training that you're going to need specifically to help you get better. So that's going to mean getting the use of a proper coach as well, generally speaking. And if you do both of those things together, then you can absolutely just make such improvements so quickly. You'll be really surprised. Within 6 weeks, when I started using a power meter and having a coach, it was a huge turnaround, and I didn't feel like the same type of rider. I felt so much stronger. But it is important to do it properly. Right, MrGodzillq is asking about new bikes here. He's got some creaks and broken spokes and that sort of thing. Thinking about maybe getting 2 bikes in one, so like a gravel bike type of thing. What should he look for not to lose the speed of his old bike whilst increasing the versatility? I would go for a double chainring gravel bike. Often they come with one chainring, but if you're going to be riding on the road quite a bit, you're going to want that spread of gears to be slightly different to what you would use for gravel. The reason they have one chainring on many off-road bikes is your speeds are often either real fast or real slow, whereas on the road you're doing a wide variety of speeds, and that's where you want to fine-tune your gearing to get a nice smooth cadence, so you're not got huge jumps between the gears. Off-road, that's less important. So if you are getting a gravel bike, probably worth looking for one that does have those 2 chainrings. Cody Koh, Chris, I'm back here again in your comments. I'm a student, pretty new to cycling. Not exactly very fit or strong, but I plan to change that. How would you structure your week if you have only 6 hours to train? Right. 6 hours to train is obviously not a huge amount, but it can be mega effective. I'd save 2.5 hours of that for one strict endurance ride, and then I break the others down into 3 shorter and harder rides. And then you want to try and mix up the sort of intervals you do, depending on what phase of the year you're in and exactly what your goals are. So you mentioned here about general fitness, base training, things like that. Yeah, you definitely want to do that as well, but you've only got limited time, so actually trying to train to intensity is going to be really beneficial for you. That's the thing with high volume training. If you don't have a load of time, it's not going to be beneficial because you're simply not going to be able to do enough of it. And that's where those shorter, harder, more intense efforts are really going to help you. You're asking me about following a program on the Sufferfest. I think that's a really good idea because that's going to give you that sort of consistency within your training. That's one thing that's really important is whilst we can all be really well behaved and train quite well for a week or two, if you want to do that for a longer period of time, you're going to need a little bit more guidance. So like a 6-week program on the Sufferfest, for example, would be really, really good. And you'll see a lot of really good improvements. And if you do that and you change a different one each time, so you either up the level as you progress or you change to try and mix things up and aim for different goals, you're really going to improve your riding. Lordy Lego, will I be staying with St. Piran in 2021? How do you pick and choose the best gearing coming up to a bunch sprint? Yes, I'm staying with St. Piran in 2021. I really want to race mountain bikes, want to race on the track, and I hope there'll be some form of road racing here in the UK. Best gearing for a bunch sprint, it all depends on, is it uphill? Is it a headwind? What's the speed into the actual final 200 metres? If you're coming into the final 200 metres and you're on tired legs, you probably want to gear down so that you're not slogging a massive gear because you're not going to have that grunt in your legs if you're tired. So if you're fatigued, try and spin a little bit more. If it's wet again and you're cold and not feeling too good, you want to be fast. Sprinting is all about being fast and powerful. It's practice, essentially. That's the one thing that's going to make it really easy to choose the correct gear each time, is just knowing intuitively the correct gear for the correct conditions, the correct speed. Is there a corner 200 metres from the line? That sort of thing. Awab Abdullahi. I've probably not pronounced that very well, I'm sorry. Winter's coming in Finland. Indoor season is right around the corner. I got into cycling during lockdown and planning to take part in my first ever race next summer, 111 kilometres. I'm not sure what fitness level I should be at. I'm in okay shape. So should I focus fully on endurance or mix in between intervals and endurance? 1 metre 90 centimetres, 75 kilos. Right, Awab. I think, considering you're going to be spending a lot of time on the turbo trainer, you want to target your intensity over the winter, because long hours just cruising along at an endurance effort on a turbo trainer is no fun whatsoever, I promise. So I recommend keeping the session short. Maybe you could do 2 in a day, like 45 minutes in the morning, 45 minutes in the evening. But target intensity, and then look for a good variation of lots of different things, basically. So some long efforts are 12 to 20 minutes, and then some shorter ones as well. You want to try and build this all-round bike rider before you discover the sort of rider that you are. Good luck if you're going to be spending a lot of time on the turbo as well. Tom, if I'm training for a cyclocross, what's the best training to do? Also looking to do some intervals such as 30s on, 30s off, and stuff that I don't see to fatigue. Is this normal? I am 13. Hey Tom, yeah, if you're 13 and you want to train for cyclocross, you want to do loads of different stuff. Actually, running is going to be really beneficial for you as well. A little bit of core training just to make sure that you develop your body equally, because at that age you're developing quite quickly, and you don't want to neglect other aspects of fitness. So, you want to make sure you've got good posture, you don't end up with rounded shoulders or slouched like I often sit. Short, sharp intervals like those 30s that you suggest, they'd be really good, because they'll really help you build your aerobic capacity, but also your anaerobic power as well at the same time. They won't be much fun, they're going to hurt, but it will do you good. Other things you could do for cyclocross would be just an 30 to 45 minute flat out session where you set up like a skills based lap in your local park maybe, and essentially making your own cyclocross circuit and try and replicate what a race is and doing it out there. That'd be quite good. How often, this is from Collett, how often should we test FTP? Should that be a 20-minute effort or a ramp test? I think if you're training with a power meter, you don't really need to test that often. I was only actually scheduled to do one this year, and for whatever reason that was, I didn't end up doing it, because you're collecting the data all the time. It's not that important. The 20-minute effort is better than the ramp test, I personally think. I think it's just a little bit more specific to actual riding on the road, though I'm sure someone will know of a physiological reason why that isn't the case. Callum Pert, who's currently using a 5034 compact chainring with an 1128 cassette, but spinning out on flat roads. You must be going seriously fast if you're spinning out on the flat. That's because it's only the equivalent of a 5312, so it's not that bad. Looking at getting a bigger chainring, 5236 or 5339. I think, to be honest, that depends on how you feel in the little ring. If it's hilly where you live and you really enjoy that 34, I would go with 5236. If, however, you never really use the 28 and you're often in quite a big gear on the back when you're going uphill, then go for a 5339. Whatever it is you go for, you will get used to it. It might feel like a big jump to start with, but it doesn't take long for it to feel normal. Years ago, everyone had a 3923, for example. That's before 25s and 28s became more commonplace, but everyone kind of managed to cope. Oli Skillz, good training sessions to help with sprinting. Yeah, 6 times 20-second max sprints will be a really good one, doing that once or twice a week. Do some seated, do some standing, do some in a really big gear, so you're like absolutely churning as if you're in the gym doing weights, and then do some in a little gear, so in a 39-15, so you're pedaling at up to 170 reps per minute or more if you can. Twice a week, max for those. Torin Storkey, how do you ace an FTP ramp test? I whipped out on my last one. I think that's what most people do. How do you ace an FTP ramp test? Focus on your breathing, make sure I'm guessing you're doing this indoors, make sure you've got lots of ventilation, so lots of fans circulating fresh air around you. Make sure you're fresh, make sure you're massively motivated as well, and don't be scared of it. Like, what's the worst that can happen? It's going to hurt. It's going to hurt if it goes well, it's going to hurt if it goes badly, so try not to overthink it, basically. Jadedforester, brace yourself. I ride to and from work, 8.5 miles each way. I would love to improve aerobic fitness to keep my heart rate more under control, as I always feel I'm pushing too hard and not doing myself any favours. I'd like to get fitter, push myself and do some local TTs or crits, but full-time busy family life get in the way. How can I better use my short ride to and from work to help with this? Considering getting rollers and turbo trainer. Yeah, rollers and turbo trainer could help if you then found some workouts on the internet targeting your aerobic fitness, so those 12 to 20 minute intervals that I often talk about. They're really going to help fast track that. You know what though, a lot of the time to get faster, it's not all about riding faster. You need to sometimes spend a little bit more time riding steady. So if you're riding to and from work 5 days a week, potentially, that's actually quite a lot of riding already. And I think you can probably only go hard for 20% of those rides. The other 80% has to be done at a relatively sedate pace. So like a nice conversational pace that you can ride along talking to someone. Then you can really make use of that 20% of the time and really go really hard. So you can either ride 2 of those rides absolutely flat out, door to door, whilst I should probably urge you to do a warm-up because that will improve your performance. It's not going to be that necessary if you're only riding 8.5 miles, as in you want to make sure you make the most of that time. So maybe you could spin really fast for 2 to 3 minutes and then absolutely smash it from door to door. Do that twice a week. Also try and include segments of the ride where you're going really hard and then backing it off, so intervals within that ride. So you can target 3 minutes on, 3 minutes off 5 times on the way into work one morning, or in the evening if you prefer to do intervals in the evening. It doesn't matter what time of day you're doing these intervals, you can either do them in the morning or in the evening. It's going to have the same effect, you just might not feel quite as good on one or the other. Akiva Maxwell, what's the best way to train in the winter? High intensity, short training sessions or long zone 2 sessions? Has about 8 hours of training a week. If you've got 8 hours available time for training a week, I'd do 1 3-hour ride each week, which was a lot longer and slower. Perhaps consider not having breakfast at the start of that to try and replicate that being a longer endurance ride. But then otherwise, in fact, no, you could then include 1 ride midweek as well, where you're also lowering the intensity. And then you've got those 3 more hours, maybe 4 more hours, where you can up the intensity a little bit and start including some intervals. It's the intervals that will make you better. Long rides are going to help if your races or events are long. But when the weather gets better next year, as in the nights get longer again, or the days get longer, sorry, then you're going to have more time to up your endurance then, and it won't take as long to build your endurance as it will to build the power from doing these intervals. Interesting question from Joe 12Trees. Hi Chris, do you gradually build your fitness and drop to race weight all at once, or do you try to do more focused phases of each? That's a really interesting one. I don't try and drop down to my race weight all at once. It'll be mega progressive. Simply, I know that if I try and do something like that at once, I get poorly because I've got 2 kids, they go to school, they bring home all sorts of germs, even now. So you want to be progressive with anything you do. I also think it's probably just the best thing for your body. Like, I want to live a long and healthy life after I've been a bike rider. That was the case previously, that's still the case now. So just tickling, as in little bit by little bit, slowly, just chipping away at the block, as it were. So you're never doing too much at once. And I just think that's the healthiest way to live your life, full stop. Julian Hawker, how about a video on top tips for running through the winter outside the UK? Yep, I think it'd be quite hard to replicate that here in the UK. But I quite like that idea. Savage Poet, can a rider use a non-branded Chinese frame in a UCI event? Not legally, no, but I suppose if no one found out, they could. 2, forget efficiency, etc. Can a rider use an old steel frame in a UCI event? Yes, well, an old steel frame, I don't know about that. There was a team in the UK that raced on steel frames a few years ago. 3, thank you, you're welcome. This is a brilliant question from Andrew Sanders, and one that I actually sort of experienced myself this year gone for the first time. Hey Chris, training question. I ride bike commute to work most days with a ride of 1 to 1.5 hours in each direction, depending on what route I take. If I'm following a structured training plan that calls for a 2-hour ride with a certain number of intervals, is there a good rule of thumb for how to break it up between the morning and the afternoon ride? Should I add extra intervals to make up for not doing as many in one set? First off, I recommend trying to speak to the coach, and that's assuming it's not a downloaded training program, because there's probably a workaround here. The next thing I'd consider doing is shortening the recoveries between the intervals, meaning you've got a little bit more time to cram in that extra interval. Then maybe shorten the cool down rather than the warm up. But to be really honest, you could just split it 50-50, do half the workload in the morning, half the workload in the evening. You're still getting that same stimulus over that 24-hour period. Granted, it's not going to be quite the same because you're splitting it between 2 rides, but at least you're getting that total workload. And I mean, there's an argument that workload is going to be slightly more quality because you'll have had that rest period in the middle, meaning you might actually be able to achieve slightly higher numbers. Then when you go out at the weekends, maybe then is the time to try and cram all of these intervals into that one ride and see how that feels in comparison to doing it throughout the week. There is no good rule of thumb. I think it's one of those that you have to try and adapt as you go along. So at the start of the year when I was commuting to work, often my session would end up with 2 15-minute blocks of zone 3 with 5 minutes in between. So I just finish the last interval and go straight into that zone 3 rather than having that 10-minute interim period, just because I was already riding for, my commute was like an hour and 20. And if the whole session was only meant to be an hour and a half, I had to try and find that 10 minutes somewhere. So I'd shorten my warm up, knowing that I'd be okay because it was never that hard. And then I'd really try and cram as much in at the back end of the ride as possible. So shorten the space between the final big interval before the zone 3 work, and then maybe even completely remove the rest within that zone 3 work, and then just arrive at the door as the interval finished, basically. It's always going to be a bit of a juggling act. You know, cycling is not always the most important thing in people's lives, and you have to try and fit it in as you can. But I think just a little bit of common sense, like you said, you could do it in the evening, get the same workload over that 24-hour period, rather than looking at it as, I have to do this all in one ride. Look at it as, I have to do this on this day. This is the good one, and probably one that's quite applicable to a lot of people that watch the videos. Awab Abdullahi, is it possible to perform and become a very good rider, e.g. across their own country, national level, when you started cycling at the age of 30? Is it possible to make a strong form when you don't have this youth-based experience? Yeah, of course it is, 100%. Isn't the Canadian rider Michael Woods, didn't he start as a relative latecomer to cycling, and he's gone on to win some phenomenal races and get some incredible results? So it is definitely possible. You just have to try and fast track your gaining of experience, knowledge and training. And the best way to do that is to race lots if possible, or just to speak to other people. Another good way is to try and find a coach, someone that can give you really good advice and make sure that you're not losing any time anymore. So you're just going to start a really good structured training plan straight away. But yeah, it's definitely possible. The only limit that, I'm a firm believer of this, the only limit in life is the one that we put on ourselves. Patrick D, hey Chris, be interested to see what cross training you do to supplement your cycling, similar to your recovery video. Yes, I'll do another one of those. We moved house in the summer and I have to set up a little circuit somewhere. But I think it would be quite interesting to do another video on that, because I think it would be different to what I did last year. Moshi Freelik, what is the main points to focus on during winter? If it's to keep your fitness up, what sessions are the most effective? That's a good question. I think one of the best ways to keep your fitness up is to do 1 hour flat out every single week, maybe even twice. So you just get on your bike, you warm up 5, 10, 15 minutes, and then ride as hard as you can for an hour. And I say this based on previous experience and having spoken to other riders that have either recently retired or they do less riding now than they used to. Just riding as hard as you can for a period of time is going to do so much to maintain everything you spent the year building. It's not necessarily going to help you make progress going forwards, but it will help prevent you losing too much fitness. So it's my friend Yanto, he still rides every week with his group in London. They do an hour and a half absolutely flat out, and he's pretty much as strong now as ever. And it seems to be one of the best ways to maintain your fitness. Other than that, make sure you try and ride for around 6 to 10 hours a week if you can, depending on how much time you have available, obviously. But yeah, that's a really good way of maintaining your fitness. 1 hour flat out. Darren White has a question. Really enjoyed the videos. I just got into cycling this year, although I loved sport all my life. On my first long ride, 82 miles, I was bonking badly at 65 miles. What's the rule of thumb to calculate an appropriate nutrition plan when I do the next long ride and hopefully avoid this pain this time? Right, yeah, there are a few things you can do here. So there's a rule that states if you consume carbohydrate to the quantity of 8 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight the day before an event. So imagine you weigh 100 kilos, just to make life really easy for myself right now. That would be 800 grams, give or take, of carbohydrates. That's the day before. Now that is quite a lot, but you can split that across many meals, obviously. The next thing is you can consume 60 to 90 grams of carbohydrate per hour when on the bike. Also stay on top of fluid intake and practice. So I would almost guarantee that the next time you ride 65 miles, you'll find it, assuming it wasn't more than 6 weeks ago, you'll find it easier than you did last time, and the chance of bonking badly at 65 miles will be greatly diminished. Also, something else you could consider is just your pacing. If you go out and ride the first 30 miles absolutely flat out, there's a very good chance you will blow. And I would as well if I wasn't consuming enough food and drink when it got to mile 65. Chaz Pilks, do you always stop for coffee, or do you have a minimum length or effort perception before a stop is warranted? To be really honest, I almost never stop for coffee on a bike ride because I often end up riding by myself. If I ride with friends, then generally we'll aim to stop perhaps at the end of the ride. But again, it's not really something we've ever done that much of. The only rides where I have stopped for coffee are like the mega social rides that I did in the 18 months when I wasn't really riding or training. And then was there a rule of thumb? Yeah, just past the halfway mark was always a nice place to stop for a coffee. Jarrod Fife, can you do a video on how to correctly descend cornering? I've recently just filmed one about riding in the wet because it was something that I always felt I was really good at. And that's based on, I didn't actually crash that often. So that one's going to go up, and then I'll wait for a nice dry day, which could be a little while because it's quite grim where we live right now. Patrick Neve, perhaps some tips on general maintenance or keeping your bike in check and ready to ride. You should see the state of my bike. But yeah, that is a good idea. Hey Chris, the channel, any Zwift exercises or drills you recommend specifically to improve climbing? This is from CMed Prepper. Well, that depends on how long your climbs are. Assuming you mean like mountainous climbs, there's some really good rides on Zwift actually, where you can get in there, and any of the rides or the sessions that target your FTP on Zwift are really good. I can't remember the names of them, but I have done a couple of those sessions. Some of the sessions that were for the Zwift Academy were actually really good that I did last year. They're hard. They're genuinely really hard. Right, here's two questions. One's from Mr. Grumpy53. Would you race at a lower level if you couldn't continue at the level you're at now? I'll answer that one really quickly. The honest answer is I don't think I would, purely because it's expensive. I don't have a huge amount of disposable income, and I'd probably choose to spend it on something differently. I think I would race mountain bikes at a lower level, so at a regional level, not a national level. So national level or above is what always interested me. This leads on to a question from Savage Poet. Can a pro return to amateur status? Yes, they absolutely can. Here's a question from Awab Abdullahi. I'm terrible at pronouncing things. Hi Chris, how do you recover after a long hard ride and prevent muscle cramp? I do lots of stretching, or I certainly do when I'm training hard. Good hydration straight after the ride and during the ride, and then also being well fueled. Generally speaking, cramp is because the muscle isn't conditioned to whatever you've put it through. So just training like again and again and again, you'll get used to it and cramp should ease. Some people are more susceptible to cramp than others, and it's a bit vague as to exactly what causes cramp, though as I just touched on, conditioning is thought to be the main cause, not hydration, but those things will help. Could be a mineral deficiency as well, by the way, so magnesium could be something that can help prevent cramp. Michael Singh. It's remarkable how you train. Felt tired this week and I did nothing. I trained to become fit and faster, especially uphill. That makes me want to know, how much can I rest without losing the fitness gained? Should I increase intensity or volume to see best gains? Tries to ride 4 days a week. It sounds like that you possibly need a little bit of time off actually in that first, so you've had a week off by the sounds of it already. Sometimes to make leaps forward, you have to just kind of sit up and go, no, I need a few weeks off now. Like every year, bike riders will have a good 3 to 4 weeks off. Tries to ride 4 days a week. That's good. That's enough. You don't need to ride more than that to improve. Crucially though, you need to make sure those rides are different to each other, that you're not just doing exactly the same sort of ride every single time you go out. And the widest tyre you can use on your 19C rim will be kind of irrelevant, because it's your frame that's going to dictate the maximum size tyre that you can take, really, generally speaking, and probably on a 19C rim, a 25 to 28 tyre is enough. Rolf Lucas, hi Chris, love the channel, keep up the good work. How do you go about determining your ideal race weight? There's no way necessarily. I think it's just personal experience over the years. You don't want to be too lean because it's just not that healthy. It's going to be different for everyone. There's no simple method to work it out. I think the best thing is just to work it out trial and error, really. So over the years, I knew that if I tried to be too skinny, I had no energy, I wasn't any faster, I just lost power actually, and also I was more susceptible to illness. At 74 to 76 kilos, I was fine, had loads of energy, was still powerful. So for me personally, that was good. And that was at around, I can't remember what it was, 12% body fat roughly, so I wasn't lean at all, like compared to what you see on the telly of those guys. Jolinator, what are your thoughts and experiences with oval chain rings? I used them for years and I really like them. I have Rotor Q rings on my bike in 2011, 12, 13 and 14. The only reason I stopped using them was because I was constantly getting beaten by someone that had round chain rings. They were generally beating me by half a bike length or half a wheel, which meant that their chain rings were right next to my shoulder. So every time I turned over to see if they're beating me, I could see these shiny Shimano Durace rings, and I thought, well, maybe I'll give them a go. Also coincided with the fact that my Q rings were worn out and I didn't have a sponsorship deal on them. So I went back to round rings and I haven't used them again, apart from one video I did last year. I used Q rings and actually I still like them. So in the future, that might be something that I change again. Duncan Haywood, I'm guessing that's you, Duncan. Is it true you can only race 3 miles an hour, then you can train? Now that's a bit of a spoof question, but Duncan, I'm very, very happy that you've sent that one in. No, it's not true. You know that as well as I know that. Louis Schuler, would you recommend the beginner to simply do long, slow rides to build endurance? Have you ever had shoulder issues from internally rotated shoulder position on the bike? I get slightly tight muscles here, much as anyone that sits at a desk will do as well. If you spend too much time hunched around like that, you're going to get this all tightening up, which means you need to do some exercises to help open that back up. No, is the answer to your first question. If you're new to riding, there's no reason to just do long, slow rides at all. You should do a mixture of rides. You will get good at what you do, essentially. So if you practice riding for a long time and slowly, you'll become good at that, but you'll also not be making the fitness gains. You won't be getting faster. You won't be able to go uphill quicker. You will create cellular development within your muscles and within your body. But if you want to get really fast, then you also want to do some intervals as well. And, just get used to going quickly. Nick W, my big question is, why do so few people race, time trial, etc.? That's a really good question, actually. I don't know. Maybe racing is something that it's not that accessible. It's really expensive, certainly here in the UK, to enter a race. You need a racing license. You need to pay something like a £25 entry fee, which I couldn't believe this year. Which is one of the reasons why I didn't do our regional races this year. I think it's prohibitive. I don't think it's that inclusive. I think mountain biking and BMX, for example, they're much more inclusive and they're much more welcoming when it comes to newcomers entering their events. I don't think cycling is actually all that, road cycling is actually all that friendly for newcomers. I also think that actually cycling is a mega social sport, so it's really easy for people to go out and ride with their mates and maybe do their own little group races and get a buzz from doing it that way. I think a lot of people don't feel the need to have competition, and I think it's probably perceived as being quite a serious thing to go and do. Also, you touch on people having really good bikes and equipment. They've spent a lot of money buying those bikes and that equipment. Do they then want to risk having a crash because they've entered an event? I would imagine the answer is probably not. So maybe the fact that cycling has become this mega expensive sport is also exactly what's holding cycling back. Cycling traditionally wasn't a hugely expensive sport. It was a working man's sport. And the numbers in the competitions were much higher. Fran, hi Chris, hope you're keeping well. How many weeks do you plan to drop down to your ideal race weight? I have a similar goal. I'm very curious to see how a pro yourself goes about it. I won't be at my race weight until April, and it's now the 1st or 2nd week of November, so that's a long time. I'll probably lose like half a kilo to a kilo, well, half a kilo a week at the most, actually. So around 1 to 1.5 kilos a month, roughly, depending on exactly how my training goes and if I get ill or not and things like that. I'm not going to be too strict with it. It's one of those things that I'm going to let happen naturally. If I get to the end of January and I haven't lost anywhere near what I was hoping to lose, then I would consider paying attention to my diet a lot more closely. As I've said before, I don't think weight is the be all and end all. I just know that for me personally, if I want to compete successfully, I need to not be too much more than 75 kilos, which is why I've mentioned that. Is it important to track your cadence? From Dayle Wood. Yes and no. I think if you're someone that feels they're being held back by not being able to spin, so if you're on a flat road and you're going quickly and you can't get your cadence up to 100 RPM, then it would be important to track your cadence and try and do some cadence exercises where you're actually forcing your body to pedal 100 to 110 RPM. But if it's just out on a normal ride and you don't actually see your cadence holding you back at all, then it's not all that important. Is it better to sit or stand when climbing hills? I tried to stand on the pedals, but my knees ache after 30 seconds. That's from Dad Yod. They say that unless you're doing something like 600 plus watts on a climb, it's more efficient to sit and actually more effective as well. So you're using less oxygen, meaning you can continue that exercise for longer. It's something that doesn't come naturally. I would say the most important thing to do when you're riding a bike is just to find your own natural style. So if that means sitting for a period of time and then standing for a little while. I move around on my bike a lot. I always have done. Other people prefer to stay seated almost all the time. It's good to practice standing every now and again because ultimately you will be able to gain the max leverage out of your bike and create the most amount of power going through the pedals by standing. But it isn't that efficient and it's only really advisable for short bursts. There's always going to be an outlier. Alberto Contador, the Spanish rider, he always seemed to climb standing up. It worked for him, but he was doing a huge amount of power as well, getting close towards that 600 watt limit that we're talking about. I would try and work on your seated climbing and see how you get on, but it's going to take a good 4 to 6 weeks before you see the benefits. Vincenzo Pratley, how often would you recommend getting a bike fit? That's a good question. I personally think you should go and get a bike fit when you're tired, because that's when the fit is going to matter. You know, we're all much more supple when we're fresh and we're not tired, and a lot of us will go and have our bike fits when we are fresh and when we are supple, meaning that we can probably get into positions that we aren't actually able to maintain when we're fatiguing. How often would you recommend getting a fit? I think that comes down to the person. I don't go very often. I know some people that go quite frequently, maybe even 2 or 3 times a year, because they have lots of things that are constantly changing. It depends on the person. Really, I don't think you should really need to go much more than once a year though. Lawrence Singleton wants to build up to doing long days in the saddle, but occasionally gets patella pain, which pain underneath the kneecap, I would imagine. And it seems to be related to doing more than his body is used to, rather than bike fit. Not fussed about going fast. Should you think about spinning high cadence, whether that make it better or worse? I'd focus on stretching. Often patella pain is because of a tracking issue with your IT bands. So meaning that they could be quite tight, which is then pulling your patella, the tracking of your patella down to one side. And stretching your IT bands or foam rollering those can really be quite effective. It's excruciatingly painful to foam roller for the first few times, but once you get used to that, and foam rollers only need to cost £5, €5, it's not an expensive thing to do, but it can really help. Other than that, on the bike stretching, so if you're confident at riding your bike, stand up with your left foot on the bottom of the pedal stroke, put your right foot on the saddle, stretch that out, and then vice versa, or just pull over to the side of the road and have a quick stretch. Often that sort of aching pain underneath the kneecap can be alleviated with a quick stretch. You'll probably find that you need to stay on top of that stretching, and you should be okay then. As for the cadence, if it is hilly, then spinning those light gears down the other side can help take some of the strain off your muscles as well. Maybe even just shaking your legs when you're on your bike to help loosen them up can be enough of an aid to help prevent that pain. Tony Segadelli asks, I'm looking to buy speed and cadence sensors plus a headset, all manufactured by Garmin. However, I don't understand how these three combine to calculate power. Already owns the heart rate monitor. If I have a strong headwind, my speed will be far lower for the same cadence if I have a headwind. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Strava, actually, when you upload your rides, does calculate average power relatively accurately for the average of an entire ride. Some segments, it can be slightly off depending on the wind direction, but on the whole, actually the estimate that comes from Strava isn't ever that far off. It's well within 10%, which actually, considering it's a computer algorithm, is really good for an estimate on something that's so precise. Are speed and cadence sensors worth buying if you can't afford a power meter? Yeah, they are. If you're interested in that sort of thing, and it's going to help you do certain training sessions or help you get more out of your bike riding, then yeah, it is going to be beneficial. Robert Tracy, I don't know if you've done a winter training video, as lockdown is now going to be a thing for definitely a month, but who knows. Like, what's your winter plan? How do you create a training plan? Well, Micah and I are doing that with her getting back into fitness. She is using an e-bike to get fit, but the principles of how you plan out a training program are still accurate. That video is probably going to go out at the end of this week. Douglas, I'm in the UK and in preparation for lockdown, I've set up an indoor training I got given by a friend. The rides I've been doing on them have been far more intense with much higher average powers, and the workouts themselves are much harder than I could do on the road. How can I make sure I'm not overtraining? I've been averaging 11 hours of outdoor training during the week, spread over 4 or 5 days. I'd like to keep up with one long 4-hour endurance ride outdoors each week, and rides whenever the weather is nice and restrictions allow. Should I substitute it with less hours of intense indoor training, or keep the same training volume, turn down the intensity indoors? I would go with fewer hours of training and stick with the intensity. The intensity, assuming that you're recovering from those hard rides, is going to do you more good than simply spending hours and hours on the turbo trainer. That's the thing about the turbo trainers. It's designed to be short and sweet, like short and intense. You get on, you do the workload, then you get off. You don't spend loads of time just pedaling just for the sake of it. That can then be your 4-hour endurance ride at the weekend. That's when you're going to get that endurance loading. Stuart Potter, how are you finding riding with your partner on an e-bike? As a pro yourself, is this working as a good leveler? I'm a keen endurance cyclist. My partner would love to come out on longer rides, but isn't overly fit, so I was considering getting her an e-bike. Thoughts? It's amazing. So obviously I ride quite a fast road bike, which means that once we get to 25 k's an hour, I've got a really unfair advantage in that my bike is incredibly light, incredibly fast. Mike has got the weight of a battery and a motor. However, the rest of the time when we're going uphill and things like that, it's the perfect leveler. So if I was, for example, to ride a gravel bike or maybe my cross-country mountain bike, when we're on those flat, faster sections of road, the sort of power output I'm doing is going to be much closer to my sort of endurance output that I need to be aiming for on a longer endurance style ride. It is a perfect leveler. Like, we've been able to ride together in a way that simply wouldn't have been possible otherwise. Sully7334 asks, off-road bike advice, should I get a gravel bike or a mountain bike? Not going to do anything crazy, but I do want to do some mountain bike trails. I think gravel bikes are great. They're like a really good introduction to riding off-road, but from personal preference, if I ride off-road, you kind of feel like you want to push it a little bit more. And gravel bikes, they just don't have the tyres to cope with any bumps and rocks and things like that. They're great in certain situations. Gravel tyres also actually aren't that great in the wet either, because they've got quite fine treads, and actually mountain bikes are better. So if it's dry where you live and you've got nice smooth trails, go with the gravel bike. If it's rocky, rooty or wet where you live, I think you'll have more fun and you'll get more out of riding a mountain bike. Tamzin Hamer. Hi Chris, I also ride in Cornwall. We've seen your favourite descent, but what is your favourite climb? I think that's so hard to answer. Any climb with a tailwind where I feel good is at that moment my favourite climb. I think Cornwall's one of those weird places where we don't really have, despite being mega hilly, we don't really have really good climbs and descents. There's a few good ones up and around Bodmin Moor. They're pretty good. The coastal road climbs, they're quite nice as well because they're picturesque. But actually thinking in my head, oh, I'm going to go out and ride that climb, that's not really a thing around here, which is bizarre because in other parts of the world and parts of the country, climbing is a thing and it's something that I enjoy, and you would go out on a ride and think, oh, I'm going to ride up there today. But no, not in Cornwall, sorry. It would be good to know, this is from Craig Walker, it would be good to know what kind of training plan you follow. How many days a week do you train? Is it cycling, weights as well? Is it effort to distance or time you'll be targeting? Many questions in one. Well, I will document this in upcoming months because my training will hopefully be running with the dogs, doing some mountain biking, road riding, doing some cross training and things like that around here, build up a weight circuit, that sort of thing. All will be revealed in December or January. Mark Lorenz Rivera. What is the biggest chainring that I've used? 55 tooth chainring in 2016. Completely unnecessary, really, to be really honest, apart from a few races where we had absolutely crazy tailwinds for like 10 kilometers at a time and you'd be genuinely riding along at 65 to 70 kilometers an hour. Otherwise, a 53 or a 54 is more than enough. 53, generally speaking, is absolutely perfect for racing. David Lackey. Hey Chris, love the channel. What are your thoughts about a pedal-based power meter? Are they a good investment for the budget-conscious cyclist? What are my dogs' names? Pippi and Bean are the dogs' names. Pippi is the Labrador, the chocolate one. Bean is a little Romanian rescue dog, the Terror. Pedal-based power meters, they're amazing. You can swap them from bikes really, really quickly. They're generally not the most expensive power meters. Yeah, so there's no bad reason to get one. The only thing you're going to be careful of is if you are racing with pedal-based power meters, if you clip them on the corners, you're going to damage them. Next question from Andrew Brown. I have a basic indoor trainer, a cadence sensor, heart rate monitor, and a speed sensor. I'd like a free app that can estimate my power. Do not want Zwift, etc., but I'd like to ride an app or video that can make my fat self up, take my fat self up classic climbs like I want to, based on my effort. Am I dreaming? Is such a setup possible? Is the only way to spend hundreds, have to subscribe to stuff? Andrew, I'm not a massive fan of indoor training, and as such, I have currently no subscription to an indoor training platform, so I don't really know what to suggest. Maybe someone can write down in the comments of an idea they have. I've heard of people using fake email accounts and using the free trial period over and over again for certain apps. Maybe that's something you could consider as well. Papa Booyah, have you ever done any triathlons? Absolutely no way. I find cycling hard enough. I can't swim that well. I can't run that well. I think it'd be quite a miserable experience for me personally. Chris Willman, how do you set up and ride intervals on the Garmin or the Wahoo? That's actually something that I don't really know, to be really honest. All I know is that my Training Peaks has sometimes synced my intervals across to whatever head unit was I was riding at the time. It's not something I've ever tried to do because I like to be able to press the lap button myself. I don't like it when the computer's telling me, oh, you've got to start now, because that might not necessarily be the best thing for that stretch of road. The instructions to that are definitely going to be online somewhere though. Hi Chris, 2 questions. This is from Chiang Kai-Shek. Is it worth upgrading to DR2, just the levers and the shifters, on a 105 group set? I don't like not being able to adjust the levers on 105, so I'm thinking of getting Ultegra, but maybe it's worth jumping straight to DR2. And is a one-sided stages crank enough for speed improvement, not racing? Yes, to the stages crank, the one-sided ones. I trained with those for a couple of seasons, absolutely no problem. Is it worth upgrading to DR2? Ooh, that's a difficult question to answer. On the whole, it's meant to be a fit and forget system, but in reality, if something goes wrong with it, it's quite an expensive system to then maintain. If you break a rear mech on a DR2 group set, it's going to cost you a lot more than if you break a rear mech on a mechanical group set. I think if it was my personal cost, I would always go for the mechanical group set just because I wouldn't have to worry about breaking things as much. I wouldn't want to have to ride around on my bike thinking, oh my goodness, if something breaks on this, I'm gonna have to pay a lot of money. You won't notice a performance benefit. And the 105 shifters, or the levers, they should be adjustable. I'm guessing you mean the lever reach or the bite point adjust. They should be adjustable in the same way as the Ultegra ones are. As far as I know, that is the case anyway. Octaviac, what's your advice on how to recover after hill climbs so not to get dropped? Second question, when I'm riding with some of the racers around my area and I'm in the draft, we're going fast, then in a couple of pedal strokes they decide to take off and go faster. I'm dropped again. Can you explain why this happens, or better yet, how they're able to tap into what appears to be another level, although your legs are moving at the same pace. Last question, how does one maintain a decently high cadence? For the cadence, in set periods of time at a set cadence will be a really good way of doing it, and you can count the cadence out in your head if you don't have a cadence meter. So 5 minutes at a really fast cadence, like 110 to 130, and build on that week on week. That'll help your legs get used to pedaling that fast. That's quite an important thing to learn, especially if you want to race or ride on the track. When it comes to your first question though, are the people you're riding with slightly more experienced? Have they been riding longer than you? Are they simply that little bit fitter than you? So when you get to the top of a climb, have you gone further into the red than they have, which is the reason they're able to continue over the top of the climb? They're using more of their aerobic capacity, less of their anaerobic capacity, meaning that it's less taxing on their body. If that's the case, you practicing going out and riding up and down lots of climbs, doing longer efforts that include not just the climb duration, but also the duration over the top of that climb. So imagine your climbs are 7 minutes long, and you've got that 3 minute stretch over the top of the climb where you're starting to struggle. Upping your intervals to the 10 to 12 minute range, doing 2, 3 to 4 of those on any one ride, or maybe 6 intervals of that length total in 1 week, and then doing that as hard as you possibly can. That will help you improve your aerobic capacity, meaning the chance of getting dropped is lower. Is it that they're somehow putting you into the wind if it's windy where you're riding? It could be that you're just not quite sheltering behind them out of the wind as effectively as you could be. And a good way to work out how much wind you're getting on you, try not to bang the microphone, is simply wind noise past your ears. If you're hearing loads of wind noise on your ears, there's a good chance that you're in the wind and you're not being sheltered on their wheels. Therapist composer, please post what you believe the best workout is to increase your FTP. I really like the 12-minute max efforts, so riding as hard as you can for 12 minutes, 2 to 3 to 4 times in one session, or lowering the intensity, so not going maximum for those 12 minutes, but then doing like a sprint or a surge every 1 minute or every 2 minutes within that 12 minutes. So imagine max intensity is 100%, it's as hard as you can go for 12 minutes, lower that down to like 90, so it's actually not that hard at all, but then do a 15-second max sprint style effort every 1 minute 45. That's really going to help get your heart and lungs absolutely screaming away, but because you're riding at an intensity that your legs can physically maintain, you're going to recover in between that. Not explaining that very well, but it's really effective, and you'll really notice after doing that. So imagine 36 minutes of that workload in one ride twice a week. In 3 to 4 weeks time, you'll feel so much more capable on your bike, and it's really going to boost your FTP, but you're doing it in a way that isn't that mentally fatiguing and stressful. It's not quite like doing 100% max efforts, because they can be quite draining mentally. I like this next question, and it's from Crapium1 Gamer, who is planning a bike packing trip next year, 230 miles over 4 days. It's hilly where they live, so they've got an 1140 cassette with a 5034 chainring. He wants to know, or they want to know, are they better off focusing on investing in good bike packing kit for this trip, or upgrading the gears on their bike to Tiagra? And I actually think if you're going to ride your bike 4 days, you don't want to sleep. You don't want to get to the end of those 4 days feeling absolutely exhausted and having not enjoyed the ride. So I think if you've got the gearing there, which you clearly have, an 1140 and a 5034 chain set, you'll pretty much be able to get up most climbs, meaning you can carry a little bit more bike packing gear on your bike, sleep much more comfortably, eat much more comfortably, and enjoy your trip that much more. I think that would be better than upgrading to Tiagra. Miggy LaChica, Speedplay or Shimano or Look pedals? I would choose Shimano over Look. And as for Speedplay or Shimano, well, Speedplay, they're good, they're mega expensive, they're not for everyone. So I'd probably go with Shimano, because you've got loads of different tiers of price that you can spend there. So if you've got loads of money, you can buy the Jurious ones. If you want something middle of the road, but it's going to be really, really cost effective for performance, value, cost equation, then you can go for the Ultegra ones, or you can ride the 105 ones like I do. James Barber, hi Chris. Should I look to replace 9-speed with 10-speed? Is there a great benefit to be had, or is fitness the bigger deciding factor? That's a marketing question. Fitness is always the bigger deciding factor. You can ride on one gear really quickly if you're fit, for example. Can you create some workouts on Zwift? Don't know if I can. I quite like that idea though. And then the final question is, how do you prepare mentally for the long training session ahead? How do you overcome the stress of daily life, etc.? Cycling is cured my anxiety issues in many ways, but keeping focus and not slipping back into a tough place is hard. Any thoughts? Yeah, it is a struggle. It's always going to be hard to motivate yourself. So music is a really good one for me. This morning I was listening to some good music, instantly puts me into a good mood, then motivates me to go out on my bike. Trying to remember the reasons why I ride my bike is really important. So this year especially, I think, has probably been quite tough. If anyone's had any goals or events, the chances are they've all been cancelled, which makes it then really hard to stay on track. And if you're struggling to stay on track, then you feel that you're losing fitness, and it's like a vicious circle. So remind yourself why you like to ride your bike. Some sort of motivator. So for me, that's music, or a reward after the ride, whether that's a nice meal or something nice to drink, for example, like a hot chocolate, that sort of thing. That's really going to help you get out of the door. I think the mental side of it is always going to be harder than the physical side of it, because it's your brain that limits us in life, really. If we all had access to mental coaching, I think we'd all be much better people, much better athletes, and the world would be quite a happy place as well. Dave, hi Chris, when you were GCN, you did some excellent indoor training sessions, which were really enjoyable and informative. Have you got any plans to do those sessions of my own? I do have plans to do those sessions. I've got a really nice turbo trainer set up, which I haven't used much yet. I need to find a location where I can film them, and also try and create some funky sessions. Chris Zaccaroli also asks a very similar question there. Hey, we've done it. 74 questions. Right, that is it for what was a mammoth Q&A. Hopefully the timestamps will help you find the questions that you were looking for, and hopefully you found the answers beneficial as well. If you'd like to see another one of these, please do let me know down in the comments, give it a thumbs up, that sort of thing, and a subscribe would be amazing as well. Otherwise, that's it from me, and I'll see you again out on the roads very soon.